Afternoon and welcome to MPTS. It's our 10th anniversary edition. I am joined by some incredible panelists today for our session, Creating a Podcast People Actually Listen to. We will be taking some audience questions towards the end of the session, so please open Slido and use code MPTS 2026 and select the audio theatre if you would like to ask a question. So with millions of podcasts available across every platform, cutting through the noise has never been harder. So what separates the podcasts that quietly disappear from those that build a loyal and engaged audience? I am joined by Naomi Channel, podcaster, producer, and head of Curve Sounds at Curve Media. Jamie East, head of podcasts at DMG Media. Callum Goddard-Mocklow, content creator and podcaster. And Charlotte Mason, head of production at Insanity. Thank you all for being here.
Sure.
So let's go straight in and discuss why do some podcasts stick. Naomi, can you answer to what the most common reason podcasts fail to build an audience and what the successful ones do differently?
I think some people think that they need to talk to everybody. I think the most important thing is to know who your audience is from the get-go. There are lots of, we get pitched a lot of podcasts in the company, and some of them are so very niche. We had one guy who wanted to come on and do a beekeeping podcast, and I was like, I'm not sure how we're going to monetize that. I'm not sure if that's a thing for us. Maybe that's an independent thing. But there obviously is a community out there. But sometimes people come in with a very generic idea where there are so many other things like that have already got an established core audience. So it's about finding that USP. And I think that sometimes people don't put enough effort into that part of it. If you can find your USP quite quickly and your key audience and liaise with your audience and ask what they want, then you're onto a winner.
Charlotte, I see you nodding.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Exactly like Naomi says, but just to add another layer onto that as well, is I feel that the first question to ask, like you say, is who is the audience? But I think also the next question to ask, which is often overlooked, is why you? Say you're the host. Why you as the host? What makes you uniquely placed to talk about that? And it could be because, say, it's two of you and you're childhood friends and you're honest with each other and funny with each other. But it could also be, for example, Jamie was across the most amazing podcast, Charlene, Somebody Knows Something. And right from the start, the host, it was a true crime series, explained that they were best positioned because they grew up in the same area, and that's why they were uniquely placed to tell that story. So why you? And don't be afraid to actually put that to your audience as to why you're the best person for that particular podcast.
Jamie, what would you add?
I think just to reiterate what Charlotte said is it has to have a reason for existing. It's so busy out there. It's so crowded. We're now getting proliferation of AI slot pods. Everything's just busy. Discoverability is appalling. So in order to cut through and in order to engage with listeners, you have to have a proper reason for being there. And that can be, niche is better in podcasting. Just someone coming up and I've got a great idea. Let's just do a football podcast, for instance. You forget it unless you're David Beckham. Just forget it. Lineker's got it sewn up. However, niche is better, and as long as you're going into it with realistic expectations. Beekeeping podcast. There are a lot of beekeepers around the world that would be super engaged, super loyal, and their retention rate would be amazing for that. But also, like you said, the relationship that the host has with the subject matter or the relationship between the hosts is just paramount. People have to have a reason to listen to that person.
Callum, what about from the creator perspective?
Yeah, I think you all have said really important points. I think for me, again, touching on the thing of authority, where's your authority in the space? My podcast comes from an angle of running and the endurance world, and I'm a very kind of average athlete in the space. So I think a lot of people watch and listen to the podcast from kind of looking at me as someone that they would feel like they are speaking to that guest. So I think finding that niche is great, but also as well, something that I've made sure with my audience is making sure the audience almost feels involved. I think so many people almost just put their podcasts out, put clips out, and they don't ever think about the interaction you have with that audience, whether it's storylines building over a long period of time, inside jokes, things like that all build that trust. And almost you've got to remember, your podcast is part of their week. You know, I release on a Thursday, and Friday, Saturday, Sunday, when people are out running or whatever, they're listening to the pod and it's part of their routine. So thinking of those people who are listening and spending their time with your media and almost taking that and going, right, how can I give back and almost make them feel involved to keep them coming back as well.
And on that point, what would you say is a reason that someone will hit follow after that first episode?
I think feeling like there's something to relate with, whether it is from the host perspective or the type of guest they get on. Something that I've done is once a month get the same guest on. So me and a good friend of mine who's also a content creator, Hugo Fry, we talk once a month and we just have a bit of fun with it. Sometimes we don't even speak about running in the episodes that we have, and people make a joke out of it saying, I thought this was a running podcast, but people are getting to know us. And I think it's almost like having that relationship with the audience where they know you inside out, but almost keep wanting to learn more about you. And I also think as well, consistency. I haven't missed a week of uploading since October, and it's just snowballed and snowballed. And I think so many people give up when their podcast is getting hundreds of listens and, you know, not even 100 listens, and they're like, oh, this clearly isn't for me. Like, this clearly isn't the role for me. So it's almost like breaking through that and believing in yourself and knowing that you're doing it because you love it, not because you want to be successful in that space. Do you know what I mean?
On the other side, when it's not a conversation pod, you know, I kind of split pods into two. There's talk show pods, and then there's other, which are usually investigative or true crime or narrative or fictional or drama. I would say, you know, everybody here is probably from a telly background. You know, that's why we're here, right? So you already know all the tricks to get people to listen or watch the next episode. You know how to tease ahead. You know how to lay breadcrumbs. It's exactly the same in podcasting. Certainly from a structural point of view, investigative and fictional and storytelling pods are exactly the same as a drama on telly.
Mm-hmm. Charlotte, anything to add?
Just so much enthusiastic nodding on my side. I would say that, I mean, there's two different challenges, isn't there? So there's challenge one is to get them to listen or watch in the first place. Challenge 2 is to try and keep them coming back each episode, and unfortunately that challenge doesn't go away. Every single episode your goal is to try and get them back for the next one. And I would say to change that first listen into an actual follower, subscriber, it's just making sure that your signposting has paid off in terms of value add to the audience member. So your signposting has worked, you've got them through the door, say that's the right YouTube thumbnail or the right episode description or the right marketing, radio ad, whatever it is, and then it's just ensuring that that value is followed through. What you promised by getting them through the door, you're followed up on, and how can that value continue to be incremental as they get through episode 1 through to episode 100.
They can't play it cool. There's no coyness in podcasting. You have to be blatant, and you have to beg, smash the like button, guys. You know, there's no point in trying to be too cool for school.
Yeah.
You've got to sell.
How about for you, Naomi?
Do you know what? It's also the amount of work and passion you have for the content that you're talking about is almost invaluable. And there have been many pods that have come before, especially in the true crime space, which is where I mostly sit, where there are lots of opinions, there's lots of chatter, there's lots of things that are completely not relevant to the subject. So when you are so passionate about what you're talking about, it shows, and the authenticity, people aren't stupid. They know if you're a trusted voice, and they know that they want to come back and feel like they can trust you with what they're hearing.
So there are so many different types of podcasts that we've even just discovered on this panel, but how about whether the market is oversaturated?
I personally feel like the saturated market element is what you make of it. I think obviously there's loads of podcasts. So many people have a podcast and are trying to create one, which is incredible. But I also think like listening to what else there is almost distracts you from what you're trying to make. Like, you know, there's been loads of new fitness podcasts that have come up into the space now, and I'm looking at it and going, that's great, but like none of them are like mine. You know, you've got to add like that human element, and I think the oversaturated part of it comes from the fact that there's only one of you. So many people will try and be something else when they get into media, when they get into content creation, but ultimately if you're trying to be like someone else, you're just not going to be as good as them. Like, no one's going to be as good as the person you're trying to copy, so you might as well be you. And I think ultimately, like for me, I always go back to that same point of like, I'm trying to keep it human. Like, we always see this kind of negative kind of mindset sometimes towards certain content creators and stuff, and the way they sort of lose touch with what is reality. And it's kind of like, you always need to remember that being a human being is, relating to that person the best, and just being yourself is almost comes through the best, I think.
You talk about Stephen Bartlett.
don't put me on the spot.
Charlotte, how do you feel about market saturation?
I would say that I think Callum makes a really, really good point that it is what you make of it. I think that the way that the content landscape is changing is we can't consider podcasts to be like TV shows. I think now we're just entering an era, it's just content, whether it's a YouTube video, whether it's a podcast, whether it's an Instagram reel, we're just in the era of content. I don't think we've ever stopped to think, are there too many Instagram profiles out there? Is Instagram or TikTok is TikTok oversaturated? We've never asked that question, so I do wonder whether we should even ask that of podcasting.
Naomi?
There's 8 billion people in the world, I think, the last time I Googled it. And I think that BBC Sounds last year did a talk at the podcast show, and they said that 1 in 5 adults dip into podcasts. That means there are 4 other out of that 5 that currently don't, and they are there to try and get. So I think no, not at all. There's something for everyone.
Jamie?
I think there's oversaturation in terms of, I guess, what we would class as the celebrity chat show podcast now. It's very difficult to cut through in that space because the pool is so small. You've got Ramesh appearing on like 5 different podcasts all in the same week, and you don't know whose podcast you're even listening to half the time. So I think that's part of the oversaturation. But the rest of podcasting, I don't think so, because it is genuinely all about the story. It will cut through. And I would also say that oversaturation is largely irrelevant because discoverability is so poor. There is no democracy in discovering podcasts on Spotify or Apple. YouTube is, one of the reasons that podcasts are so popular on YouTube now is because they have far better tools for publishers to surface their content, and far better analytics as well, so they can judge on what the success and failures are of a particular episode. For the rest of it, it's the Stone Age. RSS feeds are ancient, and it's nigh impossible to expect. SEO doesn't exist in podcasting on Spotify or Apple, so oversaturation is largely irrelevant. Yes, there are 1 million there on Apple, but you're all the same because you're all buried, because it's a manual journalistic process to promote on that,
So is discoverability broken?
Yeah, 100%. Well, it's never been fixed. Podcasting discoverability has never really been a thing. It was in the early days, ye olde days of, 10 years ago or whatever, podcast surfing was easy because there weren't that many of them, and you could break through. And also celeb podcasts, there was still room. It was like, oh my God, this person's doing a podcast. And true crime, everyone remembers discovering Serial or Sweet Bobby or these big kind of like breakthrough pods that changed the landscape. But discoverability has always been shocking. That's why TikTok and Instagram are so powerful to podcasters, because surfacing those 30-second clips of like random people behind the slatted wood walls with a big microphone have become so ubiquitous.
I do also think as well, like when you're thinking of that discoverability and you're thinking, oh, why is no one listening to mine or watching mine? I always think like, how do I discover a new podcast? And to be honest, I'm listening to my own nonsense most of the week anyway, so like sometimes I don't really reach for a podcast too much. I have a couple that I listen to, but I'm like, right, will it take 5 to 10 clips in quick succession to really just hammer home and for me to watch them all, to probably me to think, oh, I'm going to go and listen to that podcast? It's like you've got to put yourself in the audience's shoes of discoverability. Like, especially for me, like my main audience is kind of like 25 to 40 year olds, and like if I was trying to think what I would do in their position to find a new podcast, essentially just do that, if that makes sense, and try and make those bits as most appealing as possible.
Charlotte, I think that platform loyalty is a huge part of this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. By platform loyalty, what we're talking about normally is that the platform that you choose to listen to your podcast on, it's typically very difficult to get an audience member to change for something else. Like, for example, I'm Spotify through and through. I'm sure in the audience there'll be Apple Podcasts, there could even be Castbox, YouTube, and that means that if you are loyal to that platform, that is where you're going to get your podcasts. If your podcast isn't on there, the barrier to entry is so much higher. But just to touch on what Callum said, said, I think that is absolutely the right approach. The whole goal of discoverability is you just want to be at the forefront of your audience members' mind when they take a pause to think, what do I want to listen to next? Perhaps they've got through all of their regulars for that week, perhaps that they just have a little bit more time and they have time for one extra podcast. And it could be that it's because, again, like Callum said, you've seen all the clips on socials. But really, when someone is scrolling on social media, are they in the right headspace to then leave that social media app to go and consume long-form content? No, it's not what they're after for in that moment. So I think we're a lot less focused on click-through rates for that reason. What you are doing, though, is you're sowing the seeds 4, 5, 6, 7 times so that when they do get that moment of pause and they think, I've got a bit of time, I want to commute, what do I want to listen to? You're the first podcast that jumps to mind.
But still, the most powerful form of recommendations in discoverability in podcast is peer-to-peer recommendations.
Yeah.
If a friend or someone who respects us, oh my God, have you listened to this? You're far more likely to listen to it than via an ad or a host read or a social clip.
Naomi, what are your thoughts?
Absolutely that. So most of my listeners will come back and say, oh, my sister's cousin Goldfish, recommended you or something, and you kind of, and then they'll send you lovely WhatsApp screen shots of them talking about your latest episode, and that is invaluable, because not only have you got some new listeners, but actually they're forming their own conversation points about your content. So if you can make it thought-provoking and you can make it something that people can talk about, and it's that exciting, then that I'd rather have an audience of 20,000 listeners who are dedicated, who come on the day of release, rather than hit a whole load of markets who dip in and out whenever they choose.
Yeah. Well, Jamie, are we editorially overproducing podcasts as they're being launched?
Probably. I think it's... People will always want to spit and polish and make things look as amazing and sound as amazing as possible, and yeah, they should. It's very competitive out there. And if you're doing a branded podcast, or if you're working with brands and you want to, you have to put your best foot forward. You don't want a pile of crap going out there and expect someone to sponsor that. You have to brush up a little bit. But I would say that there probably is a slight tendency to, to put lipstick on a pig, is what my dad would say. Is that actually, if the core episode isn't strong, then no amount of fancy compression or amazing thumbnail or like brilliant Sony cameras with lovely depth of field is going to make any difference whatsoever. Because podcasting, we're here talking about podcasting. The boom of podcasting came about because people bought crappy mics and just sat and recorded something and uploaded it. I can't stand the man, but Diary of a CEO was created from a £30 microphone. So what you're using, the tools you're using, should be a means to an end. They shouldn't be the actual, the core thing. Yes, make it look good. Yes, make it sound good, but don't forget why you're there.
I also think we're actually maybe this is just me, but I feel like we're entering a little bit of an anti-production era. My favorite podcasts to listen to are ones that almost take the mick out of it being badly made. So Chatterbix, Joe Wilkinson, David Earl.
Love that.
I listen to it every day, and a large thing of theirs is it's really well produced, but they make a joke out of certain mistakes and things like that, and that's something that I feel adds to that human connection with the audience. You feel that you're kind of in the brain of the person presenting it, because you're like, they're not a robot that makes this perfectly polished thing. They make mistakes like everyone else, and I feel like if we just kind of go with this quick, snappy intro sort of cinematic thing, everyone's going to kind of think that there's this massive barrier of entry to podcasting. Ultimately, you're not listening to it for the production, you're listening to it for the person that's on it. Yeah. Whether it's the host or the guest that they get on, that's why you're listening. So, yeah, I think people need to focus more on the kind of core messaging to the podcast rather than the production.
It's very counterintuitive for TV people as well, just churn it out. That's the worst thing that TV people do. You look at The Overlap is a great example of a huge production, massive production, but it's made by TV people. Goalhanger, are the daddies of podcasting at the moment, and they're from a TV production background. So it's very difficult for TV to kind of go, and breathe. But we are now in a world, and I'm talking about it later on, where the Traitors Uncloaked, has decimated the spin-off show market. I come from a spin-off show background. My commissioner is sat 2 rows in front. We did a Game of Thrones spin-off that was, I would imagine, extremely expensive to make. And now, the Traitors Uncloaked thing has decimated that, and they're probably doing that for, I'd say, 30, 40 grand an hour. So the BBC are learning to do it. Rightly or wrongly, I think it's very difficult for TV to kind of take a step back and go, maybe we don't need to grade that.
You mentioned about the overlap. What's really interesting is, although it is really polished, some of the best moments are at the start when they're all coming in and getting ready, and those are the human.
They're going to start filming them getting up out of bed at some point.
So like them talking about like crisps or something. It's just human chat that you have, with your friend in the car. Those are the moments that really connect you with the audience. And I think it's got these amazing cinema cameras, but you're connecting with Roy Keane having a moan. Like, you know what I mean? It's those things that sell it.
Definitely. And you can be very reactive as well. So if something happens, especially if it's true crime or news and something has just broke, you want to be one of the first people to get that out there on podcast form. So if you're doing it with too many bells and whistles, it's going to physically take up too much time, and someone is going to beat you to it. So that's what I'd say.
And Naomi, you have an extensive TV career, so do you agree with Jamie's point?
Absolutely. I wouldn't dare not.
I'm not that bad, am I?
No, you're not.
Agree!
Charlotte, you work a lot of talent. I was wondering, how important is format versus host chemistry and choice of talent?
I mean, it's got to be 50-50. Does everyone agree with that? I think it's got to be a combination of both. I think that the word talent is constantly changing as to what that means. It no longer means celebrity. It means there's on-air talent, there's off-air talent. So I think it is a complete combination of host chemistry, format. Sometimes the most format-free podcasts can be the best. Has anyone listened to Greg James's and Alice Levine's new podcast, Bad Chat? It went out last Thursday. That was really interesting because they, I guess in a time where we feel like we have to define exactly what we are as a podcast and we enter the world, their whole marketing was around, we're actually just chatting and we don't know what it is yet, figure it out with us. And I think it actually really worked for them, whereas I guess it's something that perhaps a lot of us would dare not do because we feel like we've got to say exactly what we are from the start.
But they came off the back of Radio 1 Breakfast host and Alice. Their friendship is the hook there, right?
Exactly.
And profile.
Mm-hmm. Callum?
Yeah, I almost think it's interesting because from a content creator's perspective, the more you overshare, with every content creator, the more they overshare, the more sort of connection they have with their audience. I always take it from a podcaster's perspective of, if I am making something that I would listen to, then the people that listen to it are going to be the ones that I want to stick about because they're like me, if that makes sense. So I had a situation recently where I had an episode which I put out, and it was it wasn't received well because the guest wasn't like the people that I usually get on, and it was a really interesting experiment for me to make because I was like, right, as a host, who do you want to connect with your audience on, if that makes sense? So I sort of looked at that and go, right, that's really good because it's made me learn what does and doesn't work. And that just ultimately goes down to what I would enjoy listening to because I've kind of managed to make this audience based off the kind of habits that I have in a way, and that kind of makes an engaged audience. So it's a weird one.
Would you say that is a way of converting like a casual listener into a loyal fan?
Yeah, I think with everything, there will be a portion of my audience that comes in for the guests, or I've got a portion of the audience that only come once a month for when me and my mate chat, and that's because everyone's got a different thing they want to get out of the podcast, And I think ultimately it's as a host, understanding what those different audience types mean to the value of your podcast growth. I look at them all in a way that everyone plays a part, but I necessarily don't want to leave anyone out. So it's always trying to find that balancing act, especially when you're getting guests in.
It's a great question, Emily, because I feel like we can get so wrapped up in just get the new listeners, but what we really need to think about, like Callum touched on, is nurturing your existing listeners and making sure that as well as getting new people through the door, you're also trying to continue to take the existing listeners on a journey, continue to upgrade them. And I guess the tiers to this is obviously like tier 1 as a podcaster, you're chatting to your audience. The next step would be how can your audience talk back, so it's a conversation. The third step is now about how can you get your audience to talk to each other, which is community building. And I think that's where the real power lies, because if you build that community and your audience start talking to each other, that is where I believe loyal fandom lives.
Naomi, I was wondering, what are the most common mistakes that you see in podcast development, and how can a creator fix them early?
So I think, again, I sort of said it at the beginning, but it's so important, not knowing who they're trying to talk to. So who is their target audience, and what is it? If they could sum up their podcast in one sentence that would really make them stand out from all of the others in that genre that they're trying to break, that is something that it's so funny how so many people don't really know that from the get-go. And once you have those things, the next part is really simple, and just to not put too much emphasis on stuff that doesn't matter. So, for example, I had someone come up with a podcast that they wanted to do. It was a really good idea. They had spent so much money on this incredible sort of studio. And I was like, well, probably 50% of the people, due to the nature of the podcast, I won't say who it was because it hasn't completely flown how they want it to, but I said, well, half of them are going to switch to audio because it would be something that would be served in the gym on long drives, etc. It's quite a long podcast. So they put so much emphasis into that already they were starting from minus quite a lot of money that they were going to try and recuperate. But they also didn't have a really clear... I said, look, imagine if you bump into a commissioner, and I think this is where TV experience comes in. You bump into a commissioner and you might have 0.5 seconds to sell your idea. Can you quickly sell it? And they couldn't. So I think maybe that should be your key thing. And once you've got that, and it feels like something that you can genuinely say really proudly, then brilliant. That's fantastic.
Jamie, from a publisher perspective, what makes you say that this idea is worth backing?
I mean, probably a summary of everything that we've said here. It has to be honest. It has to have a purpose and a point to it. It has to fit into my remit as a slate and what we're doing at DMG for sure. But access is hugely important. It's either access or the relationship that the listener or the viewer will have with the talent or the host. If it's an investigative pod, you mentioned Charlene, which that flew and did really, really well, mainly because of Nicola Thorpe, our host, was fantastic. It was her. She'd been working on it for years. It was really easy to commission, but also she'd built up a relationship with all the contributors, and so access was also hugely key to that as well. And I would also say commerciality should always be the last thing that they think about. No great podcast has been devised in an agency meeting room. I would say that, because you cannot reverse engineer commercial success in podcasting, because everything has to be born from the story. And I think that's getting lost quite a lot. Certainly in broadcasting and in publishing, we all need to make a buck. But it can't be the first thing you think about, really. So if someone goes, this would be great, and I've thought about, here's my idea, and wouldn't it be great if Ancestry could sponsor this, and I've visioned Saint-Tropez are going to kind of come on board, and Virgin Atlantic, and it's just right, stop there. Because usually it involves them flying first class on Virgin Atlantic, interviewing someone. I've been pitched that podcast probably about 50 times.
Charlotte, on that note, how early should creators be thinking about monetization and brand fit?
Yeah, I guess aligned with Jamie, it is not the first thing we think about. There are so many other things to get right. However, I think over time, there used to be a fear of brand partnerships. That means that your content is compromised. It means that for some reason you're almost underserving your listeners. You almost feel like you have to apologise, I'm so sorry, there's an ad. But I feel that we're really coming past that, and brand partnerships can sometimes elevate the content, and if it's the right partnership and it makes sense and the talent has been trusted and it makes sense for the audience as well, then brand partnerships can elevate it. For example, we produce Martin Kemp and Roman Kemp's father-son title, FFS, My Dad is Martin Kemp. And last year they were sponsored by Norwegian Cruise Line, and the whole campaign was taking Martin and Roman on a cruise and following their adventures and the things they get up to, the things they chat about. Now I think that if we pitch that as a non-branded TV idea, it'd get commissioned straight away. Who doesn't want to see the Kemps cruising? But because it was a brand partnership, it meant that it elevated the content. It meant that we were able to do something out of the studio that we weren't able to do before. So there are some really great examples where it can be an embedded part of the content instead of just, I'm sorry, but there's an ad coming up.
I'd also say that the reticence for brand involvement is very much a UK thing, right? And very much, I guess, a talent-led problem. You know, pre kind of like the era of celebrity podcasts got by on, you know, everyone's heard the Squarespace ads, everyone's HelloFresh, BetterHelp, all of these adverts that, you know, that proliferate kind of the podcasting industry and have propped it up for the best part of a decade. The hosts, early hosts, are more than happy to sit there selling a HelloFresh box on an offer code. Adam Buxton makes a virtue, and Conan O'Brien make a virtue out of their host reads and embrace it. I would say that generally TV hosts that find it a little bit grubby because they're normally one step removed from adverts. They throw to the break. They aren't the break. And I think it's something that they do need to get over, because brands can be, like you say, really integral and also really generous. Let's be frank.
I also love the anti-advert thing as well. Like when, you know, a host will kind of almost like take the mick in a way that they're doing this for money. Sometimes I find it as entertaining as a listener to
100%.
like hear that human element. I always go back to it saying, like, I love to know when they're sort of just being a human being and not just doing something because they're going to get paid for it. And like I sometimes will think, oh, that'd be great if we could just be honest. Be like, yeah, we're promoting this because we're getting a few quid for it.
Conan O'Brien releases episodes purely of a montage of his host reads because they're that good. And they are amazing. Adam Buxton's done an album of his, you know?
That's quality,
I mean, it's a value exchange, isn't it? Because I think that a lot of podcasting is still free, and that is amazing. And for me, with my favourite podcasts, I want the host to get paid. I want the production teams to get paid. So if I continue to consume this content for free in return for hearing some brand partnerships, which are actually quite relevant for me and I might actually, you know, look to take part in the future, then I think that's a very, very fair deal.
There are so many audience questions, so thank you for those. I want to start with, is there still room for podcasts from individuals without an existing media presence, or is the market too saturated with well-known figures?
I just, like, from my perspective as a creator, like, I built my following whilst I was working at another podcast, and I kind of was like creating my content on the side. It was very different to the podcast that I was working on. And my particular space, like I guess you want to say authority in the fitness space, was completely unwarranted. Like I did it myself, and it was just me learning as I went. And I think there's a real value in, as a host, kind of being honest and saying, look, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm learning as I go. And you kind of tap into that human element of it. I don't necessarily think there's definitely space for people without followings to grow followings in the podcast space, because ultimately, if you're doing something in the correct way and then going about it in the correct manner, people will resonate with that, and that doesn't need a following. The algorithm now doesn't need people to have 100,000 followers to get a viral video. You just need the right hook. You need the right thing that's going to really capture people. And, you know, one video could genuinely change your life, so just post it.
Well, the barrier to entry is so low. There is nothing stopping you. You know, it's always the big thing. You know, it happens to the music industry. It happens to the creator economy. You know, there is nothing stopping you. You can make a podcast on your phone right now, and it can be on Spotify within an hour. You know, there is nothing stopping you doing it. So,
on that note, unfortunately, we do have to stop this conversation. Even though I could sit here all day. But thank you so much to all of you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day at MPTS.
Thank you.